He divorced her because he believed she couldn't give him children. 3 years later, he married someone else, only to discover his new wife had been hiding a secret that made her permanently unable to conceive. The man who destroyed the love of his life for a lie had been deceived the entire time. But fate wasn't finished with him, because the woman he abandoned, she had been raising his twin sons alone. And tonight, in a restaurant overlooking Seoul's glittering skyline, those boys just walked through the same door he did. If this story already has your heart pounding, hit that like button, drop your city in the comments, and follow the channel. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The divorce papers had been clean. That was the thing Kang Tae-jun remembered most about the end of his marriage. How clean everything looked. The signatures precise, the language cold and measured, every clause settled without a single raised voice. He had expected Amani to fight. He had half wanted her to. Instead, she signed her name with the same steady hand she used to sketch floor plans and fabric swatches, folded the papers closed, and looked at him across the conference table with eyes that didn't waver. She hadn't cried. He had told himself that proved something, that she was cold, maybe, that the marriage had already been hollowed out before he made the decision to end it. He had told himself a lot of things in the years that followed, assembling them carefully the way a man builds a wall. Not to keep the world out, but to keep himself from looking at what was on the other side. 3 years. 3 years since Kang Tae-jun, the man whose name made lieutenants straighten their spines in underground meeting rooms from Gangnam to Incheon, had walked away from Imani Brooks. 3 years since he had convinced himself that leaving her was the rational decision, the responsible one. He needed a family. He needed continuity. Not just for himself, but for the organization, for the legacy that dozens of loyal men had bled to build beneath his leadership. Imani was brilliant. Imani was extraordinary. But Imani, the doctors had told him after 2 years of trying, appeared to be the obstacle. He hadn't wanted to believe it. He had sat in that doctor's office in Apgujeong with his hands clasped between his knees and listened to words that felt like they were being spoken to someone else. Irregular cycle indicators, possible structural concerns, difficulty conceiving. He had thanked the doctor, driven home, and sat alone in the dark of his study for 4 hours while Imani slept upstairs, unaware. He never told her what the doctor said. He had told himself that was mercy, that confronting her with it would only cause her pain, that he was sparing her. But the truth he had never been able to look at directly, was simpler and uglier than mercy. He was afraid of the conversation, afraid of her face when she heard the words, afraid of what it would mean to stay and grieve that future together. Kang Tae-jun had stood across from men with guns pointed at him and kept his breathing even. But the thought of sitting across from his wife and watching something break in her eyes had undone him completely. So he made a decision instead of having a conversation. He told her the marriage wasn't working, that they had grown apart, that he needed something different. Imani had listened to him speak for nearly 20 minutes. She had asked him once, only once, if there was someone else. He said no. She studied his face for a long moment, and whatever she found there, or didn't find, she nodded slowly and said she understood. He had never known, until much later, what that understanding actually cost her. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, a mutual acquaintance introduced him to Han Yeren at a charity gala in the Grand Hyatt. She was everything the surface required: beautiful, educated, composed, from a family whose networks complemented his without threatening them. She spoke carefully and laughed at the right moments, and looked at him with the kind of quiet admiration that asked nothing complicated of him. They dated for 4 months. He proposed because it seemed like the correct next step. She accepted because he understood now, with the brutal clarity that only hindsight provides, it was the correct next step for her as well. Their wedding had been elegant. Their marriage had been functional, and another 2 years had passed without a child. When Tae-jun's private physician requested the standard follow-up examination, routine, the man had called it, completely routine, Tae-jun had gone in without concern. He was healthy. He had always been healthy. He exercised daily, ate with the discipline of someone who understood the body as a tool, slept well despite everything his profession demanded of him. The results came back on a Tuesday afternoon. Perfectly healthy. Every indicator within normal range. Fertility not a concern. Taijun had read the report twice, then a third time. He had sat in the back of his car while his driver waited at a traffic light on Tehran Row, and he had stared at those words, fertility not a concern, until the city outside the window blurred into streaks of light and movement that meant nothing. If he was healthy now, he had been healthy then, which meant the problem had never been Amani, which meant he had pressed his knuckles against his mouth and breathed through his nose and looked at the ceiling of the car and understood, in the specific way that a man understands something he will spend the rest of his life unable to unknow, exactly what he had done. He had destroyed the best thing in his life because he was afraid to have a conversation. The driver had asked if he was all right. Taijun said yes. He was not all right. Yirin, when he confronted her that evening, had not fallen apart immediately. That was what he remembered, how she had seemed almost relieved at first, as if a pressure she had been holding for years had found an exit. She sat across from him at the kitchen island with her hands folded flat against the marble and looked somewhere past his left shoulder. "You would have left me," she said. It was not a question. "Tell me the truth," he said. She told him. The accident had happened 4 years before they met. A mountain road outside Busan, December, black ice. Her car had gone over the guardrail and down an embankment. She had survived. Barely. The internal injuries had been severe. The surgeons had saved her life, but the damage had been irreparable. She had come out of that hospital permanently unable to have children, and she had spent the following years building a version of herself that could move through the world without that fact defining every interaction. When she met Taijun, she had told herself she would find the right moment to tell him. The right moment never came, because every right moment required risking everything she was building with him, and she was not willing to take that risk. So she had crafted excuses for 2 years. Subtle ones, medically plausible ones, each designed to redirect attention rather than generate alarm. She had watched him draw conclusions that weren't true and said nothing to correct them. "You let me walk away from my marriage," Taijun said. His voice was very quiet. "You knew why I left her. You knew what I believed, and you didn't say anything." Yiren's jaw tightened. "You made your choice." "I made my choice based on a lie." "You made your choice," she repeated, "because you were too much of a coward to talk to your wife." She wasn't wrong. He knew she wasn't wrong. That was the part that made the anger in his chest so difficult to locate cleanly. It kept finding its way back to him. He left the apartment. He drove for 2 hours through the city without a destination, moving through the lights and the late-night traffic with the particular emptiness of a man who has just watched the architecture of his own life reveal itself as something he built wrong. Their marriage ended the way it had begun. Not with a scene, not with a fight, but with a quiet and mutual recognition that what they had was already over. The lawyers were contacted. The arrangements were made. Taijun moved into a suite at the Four Seasons and began the process of dismantling the second version of his life in 3 years. He was 38 years old. He ran one of the most powerful criminal organizations in South Korea. He sat alone in hotel rooms at night and thought about a woman who had walked out of a conference room 3 years ago with steady hands and dry eyes, and he wondered what she had built in the time since he had failed to be worth her grief. Amani Brooks had built something extraordinary. She had not planned to. In the months immediately after the divorce, she had moved with the mechanical efficiency of someone who cannot afford to stop moving. Closing the sole apartment, redirecting her professional contacts, fielding the careful questions of friends who had watched her marriage from the outside and suspected there was more to its ending than the official story. She had answered those questions with grace and minimal detail. She had bought a flight to Paris and checked into a small hotel near the Marais and sat on the edge of the bed on the first night and allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. She had cried, not because she was broken. She had been clear about that with herself. Even in the middle of it. The crying wasn't collapse. It was the body releasing something that had been pressed too hard for too long. She gave herself 3 days. She cried, she slept. She ate a croissant at a cafe table in the cold November light and watched the street and felt the grief move through her the way a storm moves, completely, exhaustingly, and then passed. On the 4th day, she opened her laptop and sent 4 emails to clients she had been slow to respond to, drafted a proposal for a boutique property renovation in the 6th arrondissement, and made an appointment with a doctor. She had been 6 weeks pregnant. The news had arrived with a stillness that she would spend years trying to describe and never quite manage. She had sat in the examination room with the scan image in her hand and felt something shift inside her that had nothing to do with shock and everything to do with recognition. As if some part of her had already known, had been holding this knowledge gently in the background while the rest of her attended to the business of surviving. She thought about calling him. She spent 2 weeks thinking about calling him. She drafted the message 4 times and deleted it 4 times, and on the 5th attempt she sat with her phone in her hand for a long time and thought about the man who had looked at her across a conference table and ended their marriage with carefully assembled language that had nothing to do with the truth. She thought about what it meant to call him, what she would be asking him to return to, what that return would cost her. She put the phone down. She did not call him. Malik came first at 11:43 p.m. on a July night in a Paris hospital room, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, screaming with the specific fury of someone who had a great deal to say. Micah followed 8 minutes later, quieter, looking around the room with an expression of such focused curiosity that the attending nurse laughed. They had Amani's warmth in the way they reached for things. They had her cadence when they started speaking, the rhythm of it, the way the sentences came out fully formed even when the words weren't quite right yet. But their faces, the particular architecture of cheekbone and jaw, the sharp intelligence in the eyes, the way a certain expression could make a room feel smaller just by existing in it. Those belonged to someone else entirely. She raised them in Paris for the first year, then divided her time between London and Dubai as her practice grew. She hired carefully. She built her team around people who were loyal and skilled, and who understood that the woman they worked for operated at a standard that did not have a floor. By the time Malik and Micah were 2 years old, Imani Brooks had 4 active projects across 3 continents and a reputation in high-end commercial and residential interior design that made clients fly to meet her rather than expecting her to come to them. She was not rebuilding. She had built. Her mother flew from Atlanta to Paris twice a year and arrived with opinions about everything and unconditional love for her grandsons and a way of looking at Imani during quiet moments that communicated, without words, the way her mother had always communicated the most important things, that she saw exactly what her daughter had accomplished and was in full and complete awe of it. "You know," her mother said once, folding laundry in the London flat while the twins argued about something in the next room, "you could tell him." "I know," Imani said, "but you're not going to." "Not yet." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "You're not protecting them from him." "No. You're protecting yourself." Imani had looked at the street outside the window. The afternoon light fell pale and flat against the buildings opposite. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I just know that the boys deserve to come to that on their own terms. When they're ready. When I know he's—" She stopped. "When you know he's what?" She hadn't answered. She hadn't had an answer. She still didn't, not really. Just a sense that the timing would announce itself when it arrived. That she would know it the way she knew when a room was finished, not from a checklist, but from something in the air of it, the way everything suddenly held together. She was not waiting for him. She had simply not yet decided. The Seoul Commission arrived in her inbox on a Thursday, attached to an email from an acquisitions director at a new luxury hotel group expanding into the Korean market. They had seen her work on the Dubai property, specifically the atrium installation that had been photographed in 8 different international publications, and they wanted to discuss a consultation for their flagship Seoul project. The fee they offered was significant. The project itself was interesting. A brutalist heritage building in Itaewon being converted into a 40-room ultra-luxury hotel with a brief that called for something that felt simultaneously Korean and entirely without precedent. She accepted. She booked the flights, arranged accommodations at the Shilla, confirmed that the site visit and initial consultation could be completed in a single day. She arranged for her senior assistant, Ji Young, to meet her at Incheon with the preliminary documentation. And then, when everything was confirmed, she sat with her laptop open and the cursor blinking in an email draft to her mother and thought, not for the first time, about what it meant to return to Seoul. She thought about it for approximately 45 seconds. Then she typed, "Bringing the boys. Ji Young can manage them while I'm on site. They've never seen Seoul, and they're old enough now." She sent the email before she could revise it. The flight landed at 7:20 a.m. local time. Malik was asleep against her shoulder, and Micah had been awake for the last 2 hours of the flight, interrogating Ji Young about Korean snacks with the systematic thoroughness of a procurement officer. He was 3 years old and already possessed of a deeply held conviction that information was only useful if it was complete. Seoul received them with the flat, gray-bright light of a city in early autumn, the air carrying the particular combination of concrete and river and something faintly green that Amani remembered from the years she had lived here. She had not expected to feel anything specific upon arrival. She felt something specific. It moved through her chest quickly, and then was gone, and she pressed her mouth together and loaded the boys into the waiting car and allowed Seoul to begin. The consultation took 7 hours. The building was extraordinary. 6 floors of bare poured concrete and steel frame windows and decades of accumulated history that the developers wanted simultaneously honored and transcended. Amani walked the floors twice, took 400 photographs, spent 90 minutes with the lead architect discussing structural constraints and the precise tension between preservation mandate and client ambition. By the time she stepped back out into the Itaewon afternoon, she felt the specific clarity that good work produced in her, a settling in the bones, a sense of proper purpose. Ji Young had taken his boys to a park in Yongsan. They arrived to collect her with the particular energy of children who have spent several hours outdoors and consumed an alarming quantity of Korean street food, and Malik had a smear of tteokbokki sauce on his collar that Ji Young was apologizing for even before the car doors were fully open. "It's fine," Amani said, and meant it, and kissed the top of Malik's head while he leaned into her and told her at length about the birds he had seen. They had time before the flight. She had been going to spend it at the hotel, responding to emails, beginning the initial phase notes from the consultation. Instead, she looked at Malik's animated face and Micah's watchful one, and felt the day, the city, the work, the particular quality of autumn light on the Han River she had glimpsed from the car window, accumulate into something that asked for an extension. "Are you hungry?" she asked the boys. "Yes," said Micah, which was only slightly more restrained than Malik's immediate and emphatic confirmation that he was starving. Ji Young recommended a restaurant she had been to twice before, a place in Gangnam that did exceptional Korean Western fusion in a space designed with the kind of quiet, deliberate elegance that Amani instinctively appreciated. Rooftop views of the city's southern glitter, warm lighting, service that understood the difference between attentive and intrusive. "Can we get the noodle thing?" Malik asked. "We can get whatever you want," Amani told him. She should have taken them back to the hotel. She would think about this later. The 1,000 small decisions that a day is made of, most of them unremarkable, invisible, producing no consequence worth examining. She had not thought about this particular decision at all. She had simply made it, the way you make most of the decisions that change everything, without recognizing them as significant until they have already become irreversible. The restaurant occupied the top 2 floors of a building on a side street off Dosan Daero. The elevator opened directly into a foyer of dark stone and warm light, bamboo and tall black vessels, a window wall that revealed the city spread in every direction below. The maitre d' greeted them with a bow, processed their reservation, and led them to a table near the window where the boys could look out at the skyline and point at buildings and ask questions Amani could only partially answer. The evening began perfectly. Malik's noodles arrived and he declared them the best thing he had ever eaten. Micah ate his with focused concentration and offered no dramatic assessment but cleaned his bowl, which Amani had learned was the higher compliment. Ji Young ordered wine and they talked about the building, about the potential of the project, about a proposal Amani had been considering for a residential compound in the Cape Town Hills. The city glittered below them, and the restaurant murmured with 100 other conversations, and the autumn dark settled outside the windows. And for a stretch of perhaps 40 minutes, Amani felt simply and completely happy. Then the elevator opened. She didn't see it. She was cutting Malik's noodles into shorter lengths because he had complained they were impossible to manage, and she was pretending to find this more difficult than it was so that he could feel like he had correctly identified a genuine problem, and she was listening to Micah explain something complicated about a bird he had seen in the park, and she was aware of the ambient sound of the restaurant around her in the comfortable background way that you are aware of things that don't require your attention. The door opened. A party was shown to a table on the far side of the room. Ji Young noticed first. Imani saw the shift in her assistant's expression, the slight, careful stillness of someone who has just registered something and is deciding how to respond to it. Ji-young looked at Imani with the specific quality of attention that communicated, "There is something you need to know, and I am trying to decide how to tell you." Imani. Malik laughed at something Micah said, a bright sound that carried across the room. Across the restaurant, she heard a fork hit a plate. The sound was sharp enough, deliberate enough, that several nearby tables looked up. Imani lifted her eyes. He was already standing. Kang Tae-jun stood at a table perhaps 30 feet away with a woman she didn't recognize, and the expression of a man who has just been struck by something he had believed was no longer capable of reaching him. He looked older, not badly, just more so, the way people do when 3 years of real living have moved through them. He was wearing charcoal gray, no tie, the jacket cut with the precision of something made specifically for him. His hands were at his sides and his face had done the thing she remembered, cleared itself of everything extraneous, stripped down to its essential expression, which in this moment was something she had never quite seen on him before. He looked at her. Then he looked at her sons. His sons. She watched him see it, watched the recognition move through him like weather, the bone structure, the pale complexion both boys had inherited against the warm dark of their skin, a combination that was theirs alone and that announced its origins to anyone who knew what they were looking at. She watched Tae-jun's face go through something that had no clean name. She watched a man who had never, in 3 years of marriage and everything since, let her see him undone, become completely undone. Malik looked up from his bowl and noticed the man staring. "Mama," he said, with the directness of a 3-year-old who has not yet learned to pretend he hasn't noticed something, "why is that man looking at us?" Imani felt the whole room rearrange itself around her. She had prepared for this. She had told herself, many times, in the way that you tell yourself things that are partially true, that if this moment ever arrived, she would be ready for it. She had imagined versions of it in various configurations over 3 years, each one different, each one resolving differently, depending on her mood or the particular angle of what she needed to believe about herself that day. She had imagined herself calm, or angry, or cold. She had imagined herself walking away. She had imagined elaborate exchanges of devastating precision that left her with all the best lines. None of those preparations did anything useful for her in this moment. What she felt was very simple. It moved through her cleanly, without drama, and it was not grief or anger or the particular devastation she had spent the first year after the divorce learning to live alongside. What she felt was something closer to recognition. The moment she had been not waiting for had arrived. It had arrived in a restaurant in Seoul with her sons eating noodles at a window table, and it was exactly as significant as it needed to be. And there was nowhere to go with it except forward. She kept her face level. She set down her fork. "It's all right," she told Malik quietly. "Just someone I used to know." Tae-jun crossed the restaurant. He moved the way he always moved, with the particular unhurried certainty of someone who has never had to negotiate his right to exist in a space. But she could see, because she had spent 2 years learning to read the coded language of his body, that his hands were not entirely steady, that the line of his jaw was doing something controlled and deliberate, that beneath the surface of Kang Tae-jun's composure, something fundamental had cracked open and was still in the process of deciding what shape it would take. He stopped at the edge of their table. For a moment he said nothing. Malik stared up at him with the unself-conscious evaluation of a 3-year-old conducting a thorough assessment. Micah had turned from the window and was watching Tae-jun with the same focused, measuring attention he gave to everything unfamiliar. Not afraid, just gathering information. "Imani," Tae-jun said. His voice was controlled. She could hear what the control was costing him. She met his eyes. "Tae-jun," she said. "Neutral. Even." He looked at the boys. He looked at them the way someone looks at something they have been trying for years not to think about directly, with a completeness that had nothing to do with choice. His eyes moved across Malik's face, across Micah's, cataloging without meaning to, arriving at a conclusion he already knew. "Are they—" He stopped, started again. "Are these your sons?" He already knew the answer. She could see that he knew. He was asking because asking was the only thing between him and the full weight of what he had already understood. Imani looked at him for a long moment. The restaurant continued around them. Dishes moved, conversations murmured, the city glittered below the window. Malik had gone back to his noodles with the practical self-possession of someone who is determined that adults saying nothing to each other for extended periods is not his problem. Micah was still watching Taejun. He had tilted his head slightly, the way he did when something interested him enough to examine at length. Yes, Imani said. One word. She watched it land. She watched Kang Taejun, the man who ran Seoul's most powerful underground organization, who had sat across negotiating tables from people who would have killed him without hesitation, who had never once in the 2 years she knew him let her see him be afraid of anything. She watched him absorb that single syllable and understand everything it contained. He pulled out the empty chair across from her without asking. He sat down. On the other side of the restaurant, the woman he had arrived with, beautiful, composed, watching him across 30 feet of restaurant floor with an expression that was trying and failing to be neutral, said his name in a tone that he didn't appear to register at all. Malik looked up from his bowl at the man now sitting across from their mother. "Are you my mama's friend?" he asked. Taejun looked at Malik's face. A muscle in his jaw moved. "I'm trying to answer that," he said quietly. Micah set down his chopsticks with deliberate precision. He looked at Taejun with the specific concentration he reserved for things he considered genuinely interesting. Then he looked at his mother. "Mama," Micah said, "he has the same eyes." The restaurant felt suddenly very small. Imani kept her face composed. She felt everything behind it. 3 years of Paris mornings and London rain and Dubai heat and Cape Town light, 3 years of early wake-ups and first words and fever nights and birthday cakes, 3 years of building something extraordinary out of the wreckage of a man's cowardice. She felt all of it pressing at the back of her throat, and she breathed through it and held herself level. "I know," she said to Micah. Taejun made a sound that wasn't quite a word. He pressed his hand over his mouth. His shoulders moved once, a sharp involuntary motion, and then he was still. But still in the way of something that has stopped itself by force rather than by ease. "How old?" he managed. 3, Imani said. "Both of them. Malik came first. Micah came 8 minutes later and has been making up for the delay ever since." Micah looked at her with an expression that suggested he did not find this characterization fully accurate. Malik, for his part, appeared to have accepted the presence of this stranger with the philosophical flexibility of a child who has spent his life moving between continents and considers novelty a baseline condition of existence. "They're healthy?" Taejun's voice was stripped raw now. The composure had not collapsed. He was still Kang Taejun, still that particular combination of control and contained force that she had spent years learning to read. But the texture of his voice was different from anything she remembered. "They're okay. He looked at her. "You're okay?" "We're better than okay," Imani said. It wasn't a comfort. She didn't say it to comfort him. She said it because it was true, and because the truth, delivered clearly, seemed like the most honest thing she could offer him at this particular juncture, more honest than anger, which she no longer had the energy to perform, and more honest than warmth, which she had not yet decided he had earned. He nodded. A single, slow movement. He looked at the table between them, the half-eaten bowl of noodles, the glass of wine she hadn't finished, the small origami crane Micah had constructed from a napkin during a pause in dinner and placed carefully beside his bowl. "Imani," he said, without looking up, "I need you to know." "Not tonight," she said. He stopped. "Whatever you need to say to me," she continued, keeping her voice even. "Tonight is not the night for it. Tonight my sons are eating dinner and they have a flight in 3 hours, and I would like the rest of this evening to be what it was before you walked over here." She picked up her fork. "When you're ready to have an actual conversation, a real one, not whatever this is, you know how to reach me. My contact information hasn't changed." He sat there for a moment longer. She could feel him wanting to say something else. She could feel the weight of everything he had assembled to say, maybe across months of reconstructing the past, maybe just across the 30 feet of restaurant floor it had taken him to get to this table. She could feel it building, and she held her position and let him sit with it. Finally, he stood. He looked at Malik and Micah one more time. Malik waved at him cheerfully. Micah studied him with those ancient, focused eyes. Taejun turned and walked back across the restaurant. He did not return to his table. He went directly to the elevator. Through the window, Imani watched the city lights without seeing them. Ji Young, who had been silent through the entirety of the exchange, with the concentrated invisibility of a person who is very good at their job, refilled Imani's wine without being asked. Malik went back to his noodles. Micah picked up his napkin crane and turned it in his fingers, examining it. "Mama," he said eventually, "is that man going to come back?" Imani looked at her son. She thought about the look on Tae-jun's face when Micah said he has the same eyes. She thought about the involuntary movement of his shoulders, the stripped-down quality of his voice. She thought about the years she had spent becoming exactly who she was, and the distance between the woman she was now and the woman who had signed those papers, and how strange it was to sit in a restaurant in Seoul and feel almost nothing like the person Kang Tae-jun had divorced. "I don't know," she told Micah honestly. Micah considered this. "Okay," he said, with the equanimity of someone who has determined that uncertainty is an acceptable condition. 3 hours later, Imani Brooks boarded a flight out of Incheon with her sons asleep against her shoulders and her phone lighting up with a message from a number she had not deleted in 3 years, and the message said only, "We need to talk." "I know I don't deserve that. I'm asking anyway." She turned the screen face down against her knee. Outside the window, Seoul's light shrank and scattered and disappeared beneath the cloud line. She did not reply. But she didn't delete the message either. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, tucked into seat 3A at 38,000 feet, was that the moment Tae-jun walked back through his apartment door that night, the woman waiting there with her arms folded and her composure drawn very tight was about to say something that would make the ground shift beneath his feet a second time before the night was over. And this time, the collapse wouldn't be quiet. The apartment was dark when Tae-jun pushed through the door at 11:30. Not completely dark. Yeren had left the kitchen light on, the under-cabinet strip that cast everything in a pale, clinical white, the kind of light that made shadows look like accusations. She was sitting at the island with a cup of tea she hadn't touched, still in the dress she'd worn to dinner, her coat folded across the chair beside her with the careful precision of someone who had returned home and immediately needed to do something with her hands. She looked up when he came in. He didn't say anything. He set his keys on the console by the door, the small ceramic dish she had chosen, part of a set from a boutique in Insadong, the kind of detail he noticed now in the way you notice the furniture of a life you are in the process of leaving. He shrugged off his jacket. He went to the kitchen and poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey and drank half of it standing at the counter with his back to her. "You walked out of the restaurant," Yeren said. "I know. You left me sitting there for 20 minutes. I know." He turned around. He set the glass down on the marble. "I need to ask you something." She read his face. He watched her do it. The way her eyes moved across him, assessing the particular skills she had developed over 2 years of reading the mood of a man who operated in a world where moods were information and information was currency. She was good at it. He had appreciated that about her once. "Ask," she said. "The fertility tests," he said. "The ones you mentioned. The specialist you saw in your first year of our marriage. The one you told me indicated potential complications." Yeren set her teacup down very carefully. "What about them? Were they real?" The kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere below, the city moved and breathed and continued without them, 40 floors of indifferent concrete between them and the street. The refrigerator hummed. A car horn sounded, muffled and brief. "Tae-jun, ko, yes or no?" he said. "That's all I'm asking right now." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked at the tea. "No," she said. He had known. He had known from the moment he sat across from Imani in that restaurant and felt the full architecture of the last 3 years begin to reveal its actual structure. The lies within the reasonable explanations. The strategic silences that had functioned as walls around a truth she had never intended him to reach. He had known, and knowing had not made the word any easier to receive. "Why?" he said. It came out flat. Not angry, not yet. Just flat. The way his voice went when he was processing something that required all available resources. Yeren looked up at him. Something in her face had shifted. The composed surface still present, but thinner now, the way ice looks when you can see the water moving underneath. "Because you would have left." "I left anyway." "Not because of me." She stood up. You left your first marriage because you thought she couldn't give you children. You came into our marriage with that fear already built in. She stopped, started again. I needed time. I thought if you loved me enough, if we were solid enough, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter, he repeated. That's not... You hid a medical reality from me for 2 years. His voice was still flat, but she heard something moving under it now. You watched me carry guilt about my first marriage and you said nothing. You watched me believe I had made the right decision and you... He pressed his hand against the counter. You used my mistake against her. I didn't do anything to her. You benefited from what was done to her. You knew what I believed. You knew why I left. And you built our marriage on top of that. You built our marriage on a coward's decision, Yaren said, and her voice had gone hard now, the composure crystallizing into something colder. Don't stand there and make me the only villain in this room, Taejun. You left a woman you loved because you were afraid to have a real conversation with her. I didn't make you do that. Your fear made you do that. He looked at her for a long time. She wasn't wrong. He was aware that she wasn't wrong, in the same way you are aware of a wound you can't see, by pressure, by the particular quality of the pain. She had done something unforgivable, and she was still not wrong, and the two things existed simultaneously in the kitchen like objects that took up space, and he had nowhere to put either of them. What happened to you, he said, medically? What actually happened? The hardness in her face shifted, not softened, changed. Something older, quieter, moved behind her eyes. An accident, she said. Before we met. A road outside Busan, winter. I went through a guardrail. She paused. I was in the hospital for 3 weeks. The damage was, they couldn't repair it. I came out of it, and I was... She stopped. Her hands went flat against the kitchen island. I was 27 years old, and I came out of that hospital knowing I would never have children, and I spent the next 2 years deciding how to exist with that. And how you decided to exist with it, he said, was to find someone who wanted children and not tell him. I decided to find someone, she said, and hope that love would be enough. And then I found out it wasn't, or it wouldn't be, and I couldn't make myself lose you. She said it without breaking. That was the thing about Yaren. She had a particular kind of strength that was about endurance rather than warmth, about surviving rather than connecting, and even now confessing something that was dismantling their marriage in real time, she maintained a dignity that was almost architectural. He didn't hate her for it. He had wanted to, on the drive home, sitting in the back of the car while his driver maintained a professional silence and the city slid past the windows. He had assembled something that felt like hate, and held it and examined it and found it wasn't quite right. It had too much of himself in it, too much recognition, because Yaren had done something terrible with fear. And he had done something terrible with fear, and the only difference was the magnitude of what they had each destroyed. I can't, he said. She looked at him. I can't stay in this, he said. You know that. A breath moved through her. Something in her shoulders dropped, not dramatically, just the small release of someone who has been holding a position for a very long time and has finally received permission to stop. She looked at the counter. She nodded once. I know, she said. He poured the rest of the whiskey down the drain. He went to the guest room. He sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and pressed his hands against his face and breathed. Just breathed, working at it, the way you work at staying calm when calm is the only thing between you and something you can't come back from. And thought about a restaurant, and a table by a window, and 2 small boys with faces that had required no explanation. He called Park Sung-jin at 7 the next morning. Sung-jin was his closest lieutenant, and in the specific way that men in their position developed these things, his oldest friend, which meant he knew approximately 40% of what Taejun was actually thinking at any given moment, and had the sense to not push for the remaining 60. He arrived at the Four Seasons suite. Taejun had moved out by 6 a.m., efficiently, with the practice of someone who had done this before. With 2 coffees and the particular expression of a man who has already reviewed the situation from multiple angles and is prepared to discuss any of them. Taejun told him what happened in the restaurant. Sung-jin listened without interrupting, which was one of his better qualities. He sat in the chair by the window with his coffee in both hands, and his face arranged into the careful neutrality of someone processing information that is significant but not yet fully categorized. When Taejun finished, Sung Jin was quiet for a moment. Both of them? He said. Twins. And you're certain they're... I'm certain. Sung Jin nodded slowly. He looked at the window. Below, the city was moving through its morning. The particular compressed energy of Seoul at 8 a.m., the traffic already dense, the Han River glinting through the gaps between buildings. Does anyone else know from our side? No. You need to keep it that way. Sung Jin set his coffee down. You know how the organization responds to us? This isn't an organization matter, Taejun said. Sung Jin looked at him. This is a family matter, Taejun continued. When I address it, I'll address it as a man, not as the boss. Those two things don't separate as cleanly as you'd like them to. Then I'll make them separate. Sung Jin held his gaze. He had the good sense not to argue further, which was why Taejun had called him and not anyone else. He picked up his coffee again. What are you going to do? Taejun looked at the city. I'm going to call her. And say what? He had been thinking about this since approximately 32,000 feet somewhere over the Pacific, in the hours after he sent the message she hadn't responded to. He had drafted versions of it in his head, formal, careful, contrite. He had taken all of them apart. He had decided somewhere around 4 in the morning that there was no version of this conversation that worked if it was constructed. That the only thing he had, the only real currency left available to him, was honesty stripped of all strategy. He was not naturally good at that. He was going to have to get better at it. The truth, he said. Imani's phone rang at 8:47 Seoul time. She was in the London flat. She had taken the red-eye from Incheon, arrived at Heathrow in the early morning gray, put the boys down in their beds with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had mastered the art of travel with small children, and sat at the kitchen table with her own coffee going cold while the city outside the windows did its slow, rain-softened morning. She had not slept on the flight. She had sat with her face turned toward the window, and the cabin dark around her, and the boys pressed against her sides, and felt the city shrink below her, and thought, with more composure than she would have expected of herself, about everything. She saw his name on the screen. She let it ring 3 times. Not because she was undecided. She had made her decision somewhere over Siberia, in the specific clarity that sleeplessness and altitude sometimes produced in her. She let it ring 3 times because she needed 3 breaths, and she was honest enough with herself to admit that. She answered, Imani. His voice was different from the night before. The restaurant version of his voice had been shock-controlled, stripped of everything except the barest function. This was something else, quieter, less managed, the particular texture of someone who has been awake for the better part of a night with their own thoughts and arrived somewhere past pretense. Taejun, she said, thank you for picking up. I told you I'd talk when you were ready. I'm assuming this is you being ready. A short pause. I need to apologize. You need a lot of things, she said. Apology is probably on the list, but I'm not going to sit here and receive it on the phone at 9 in the morning while my sons are sleeping down the hall. If you want to talk, actually talk, you're going to have to do it properly. What does that mean? It means you're going to need to come to London. The pause this time was longer. Okay, he said. She had expected negotiation, some form of counter-proposal, a neutral city, a video call, a meeting through lawyers. The immediate assent was not what she had prepared for, and it rearranged something small but significant in her chest. I'm not promising anything, she said. We're not going to resolve 3 years of history in one conversation. I'm not ready to make decisions about the boy's relationship with you on any kind of accelerated timeline. If you come here, it's because you want to have one honest conversation. No agenda, no strategy. If I sense strategy, I will end the meeting. Understood. And Taejun. She let a beat pass. You should know that I am not angry at you anymore. I was, for a long time. I'm not now. But that doesn't mean what you did was okay, and it doesn't mean we're anywhere near the kind of trust that would be necessary for what I imagine you want. If you come here with expectations, I don't have expectations, he said. I don't have the right to have expectations. She looked at the rain running down the kitchen window, the way it gathered at the sill and moved in small, irregular streams, each one taking its own path down. 3 days, she said. I'll give you a time and address. Come alone. He said he would. She hung up and set the phone face down on the table and sat with her hands wrapped around her cold coffee and thought about the look on his face in the restaurant. The involuntary movement of his shoulders, the stripped quality of his voice, the way he had looked at her sons with an expression that had no performance in it at all, just the raw arrival of understanding. She was not softening toward him. She was trying to be accurate. He arrived in London on a Wednesday. She had told Ji Young to take the boys to the Natural History Museum for the morning. Micah had been requesting dinosaurs for 3 weeks, and the timing was convenient, and arranged for the flat to be hers alone. She wanted the conversation to happen without the boys in the building. She wanted no possibility of Malik wandering out of his room at the wrong moment, no chance of Micah's precise observational commentary arriving in the middle of something she hadn't yet figured out how to navigate. He knocked at 10:15. She had seen men nervous before. In her professional life, in the moments before a major client reveal, in the specific vulnerability of people who have invested enormously in something and are about to learn whether it held up. Nervous looked different on different people. On Taejun, it looked like stillness, a deliberate, managed quality to every movement, the way you move when you are being very careful with yourself. He was in dark clothes, no coat despite the cold, and he looked like someone who had not slept enough but had made peace with that. He looked, she thought, like himself, just more accountable for it. She stepped back from the door. He came in. He looked at the flat, the light, the objects, the way she had assembled a home in this space, and she could see him cataloging it the way people catalog the evidence of a life they weren't present for. "Sit down," she said. He sat at the kitchen table. She sat across from him. She did not offer coffee. "Say what you came to say," she said. He put his hands flat on the table. He looked at them. Then he looked at her. "I left you because I was afraid," he said. "Not because of the fertility question. That was the reason I gave myself, but it was a structure I built around a simpler truth, which was that I didn't know how to have the conversation. I didn't know how to sit across from you and tell you that I was terrified of the future, and I needed us to face that together. So I found a way to leave that let me feel like I was being rational." Amani said nothing. "The doctor told me you might have difficulty conceiving," he continued. "He didn't tell me it was impossible. He gave me information that I then used to make a decision I had already made emotionally, and I have spent 3 years telling myself it was the correct decision, because the alternative was knowing that I destroyed the best thing in my life because I couldn't handle a hard conversation." He breathed. "I found out last month that my fertility has never been in question. I found out last month that I ended our marriage on the basis of a fear I didn't examine, and a lie I allowed someone else to build on top of that fear." "Someone else," Amani said. "Yeren." He met her eyes. She knew about her own situation, a medical situation she had before we met, and she chose not to tell me. "We're separated. That's—" He paused. "That's over. I'm not asking about that. I know. I'm telling you because I don't want to hide the state of things. You said no strategy. No strategy means no selective information." She studied him. This was the thing about Taejun, the thing she had spent 2 years learning during their marriage and 3 years thinking about since, that beneath the control and the composure and the specific authority of a man who had built his life around never being the one without information, there was something that was not calculated. A core that was simpler and more honest than the architecture around it. She had loved that core. She had married it, and she had watched him bury it under fear and make a catastrophic decision and call that decision rational. "You have sons," she said. He flinched, just slightly. "Yes. They're 3 years old. Malik was born first. He is loud and confident, and he decides within 4 minutes whether he likes someone, and then he commits to that opinion completely. Micah is quieter. He watches everything. He decided you had the same eyes approximately 90 seconds after seeing you." She held his gaze. "They are extraordinary. They are healthy and curious and funny, and they take up a great deal of space. I have raised them alone because that was the decision I made, and I do not need your help or your validation in telling you it was the right decision for us." "I know," he said, "but I have thought, more than once, about what it means for them to grow up not knowing their father, about what that absence might cost them later. And I have not been able to resolve that question cleanly, which is one of the reasons I am sitting here instead of having my lawyers communicate with yours." He was very still. "What do you want?" she asked him directly. Not what you think you should want, not what looks right. What do you actually want? He looked at her for a long moment. I want to know them, he said. I want the chance to be someone they don't regret knowing. I'm not asking for reconciliation or custody or anything that requires you to give me more than... He stopped. His jaw worked. I want to be in their lives if that's something you'll allow. And I understand if it's not. The rain moved against the windows. Imani sat with everything he had said, and with the things he hadn't said, and with the long, complicated geography of the past 3 years, and with the image of Micah turning that napkin crane in his small fingers and saying he has the same eyes with the matter-of-fact precision of someone who simply notices what is true. I'm not making any decisions today, she said finally. I know. I need time. The boys need... She paused. This has to happen at a pace that makes sense for them. Not for you and not for me. For them. Yes, he said. And if I ever feel that you are treating this like a negotiation, like something with leverage points and outcomes you're working toward, it's over. I will remove you from this situation entirely, and you will not see them. I understand. She stood. He stood. She walked him to the door. He pulled it open and then stopped, and she could feel him assembling something. A final piece of the conversation, something he needed to leave with her. Imani, he said without turning around. What? I know you don't need to hear this. I know it doesn't change anything or fix anything, but his hand tightened on the doorframe. I am sorry. Not for the outcome. For the cowardice that produced it. For the conversation I didn't have. For every year you spent doing alone what we should have been doing together. She heard it land. She felt it, not as relief, not as forgiveness, but as something that required acknowledgement. The way an accurate statement requires acknowledgement, regardless of how it makes you feel. I heard you, she said. He nodded. He left. She stood at the closed door and breathed. Then her phone rang. It was her mother. How did it go? He came, Imani said. And? She turned back toward the kitchen, the table where they had sat across from each other. The two chairs angled slightly, the way chairs look when a conversation has just happened in them. He told the truth, she said. Finally. Her mother was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? Imani looked at the kitchen, at the rain on the windows, at the cold coffee she still hadn't finished, at the flat that was hers, entirely, absolutely hers, and the 2 rooms down the hall where her sons would come back from dinosaurs and need lunch and have opinions about the afternoon, and the enormous complicated shape of the decision that was now irrevocably in front of her. I don't know yet, she said, but even as she said it, she heard something in the back of her mind, a small, precise voice that sounded very much like Micah, turning a paper crane in his fingers, making an observation so accurate it reorganized the room. He has the same eyes. And for the first time in 3 years, the thought didn't feel like a wound. It felt like the beginning of something she hadn't yet named. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, standing in the kitchen of her London flat while her mother waited on the line, was that 2 time zones away, in a glass-walled office in Gangnam, Park Sung-jin was sitting across from a man Tae-jun trusted completely. And the conversation they were having was going to make everything she had just decided feel very, very fragile before the week was... The message came through Sung-jin's phone at 11:47 on a Wednesday night. Not a call. A photograph. Sung-jin stared at it for 3 seconds. Then he called the number back and got nothing. Disconnected. Burner. Already gone. He sat in his car in the parking structure beneath his Mapo apartment building and looked at the photograph on his screen and felt the specific cold that moves through a man when he understands that something has already been set in motion and he is only now learning about it. He called Tae-jun. Tae-jun was on the flight back from London. His phone went to voicemail. Sung-jin left no message. He sat in the dark of the parking structure for another 4 minutes, thinking through the angles, and then he drove back to the office. He needed to understand exactly how bad this was before he decided what to do with it. Tae-jun landed at Incheon at 6:20 a.m. Thursday. He had slept 3 hours on the flight, which was more than he had managed in the previous 2 nights combined, and he felt the particular clarity of someone who has passed through exhaustion and arrived somewhere on the other side of it, not rested, but simplified. The London meeting had done something to him. He couldn't name it cleanly. It wasn't relief, and it wasn't resolution, and it wasn't the beginning of anything he could chart. It was more like the sensation of finally putting down something very heavy, not because the weight was gone, but because you had stopped pretending it wasn't there. Imani had hurt him. She hadn't forgiven him. She hadn't promised him anything. But she had heard him, and she had sat across from him with the full measure of herself. That particular quality she had, the one that had undone him the first time he met her, where her attention felt like being looked at by someone who was not going to let you be anything less than what you actually were. And she had not dismissed what he said. It was, he thought, more than he deserved. His driver was waiting at arrivals. The morning was gray and cold, the highway back to the city slick with overnight rain. Tae-jun checked his phone in the car. 3 messages from Sung-jin, each time stamped between midnight and 1 a.m., each saying only, "Call me when you land, urgent." He called. Sung-jin picked up on the first ring. "Where are you?" "In the car, 20 minutes out. What happened?" A short silence, the kind that precedes information being organized rather than information being withheld. "Not on the phone," Sung-jin said. "Come directly to the office." Sung-jin. "Directly to the office, Tae-jun. Don't go to the hotel first." He looked at the highway. The rain had started again, light and insistent, and the wipers moved across the windshield in their slow rhythm, and the city appeared ahead of them in pieces through the gray. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. Go. Sung-jin was alone in the conference room when Tae-jun arrived. The room was on the 14th floor of a building in Gangnam that existed publicly as a commercial real estate consulting firm and privately as the administrative core of everything Tae-jun's organization actually did. Sung-jin had the lights at half, which he only did when he was thinking through something complicated, and there was a manila folder on the table in front of him that he had not opened. Tae-jun sat down. Sung-jin pushed the folder across the table. "Someone sent this to my phone last night," he said. "Anonymous. The number's already dead." Tae-jun opened the folder. There were 6 photographs. He went through them slowly, the way you go through something you need to fully understand before you react to it. The first 3 were surveillance shots, long lens, outdoor settings, the kind of photography that required either professional equipment or professional training. The 4th was a document, a copy of something, photographed rather than printed, the edges slightly blurred. The 5th and 6th were the ones that required him to sit very still for a moment with his hands flat against the table. They were photographs of his sons, not from the restaurant. These were different, taken at what appeared to be the Natural History Museum in London, the great stone facade unmistakable in the background, Malik and Micah moving through a crowd with a woman he recognized as Imani's assistant. The photographs were close enough to show their faces clearly, close enough to show Micah looking at something above the camera's frame with that focused expression, close enough that whoever had taken them had been within 20 feet of his children. The document in photograph 4 was a birth record, both boys. London registration. Father listed as unknown. He closed the folder. "Who sent it?" he said. "I don't know yet." "Who knows about the boys besides you?" "Nobody from us." Sung-jin's voice was careful. "But someone knew enough to surveil her in London. Someone knew she was there. Someone connected her to you and had the photographs taken before you even landed." Tae-jun looked at this folder. "How long do you think this has been in motion?" "The restaurant," Sung-jin said. "My guess. Someone saw you cross the floor. Someone in that restaurant that night." Tae-jun thought about the restaurant, the tables, the staff, moving efficiently through a full dinner service. The other diners spread across the room in the soft golden light, paying the particular variety of well-mannered inattention that expensive restaurants cultivated. He had not been looking at any of them. He had been looking at Imani, and then at his sons, and the room had ceased to exist as anything other than the space between him and that table. He had been careless. He had walked across a public restaurant in a city where his face was known, where his name was currency, where dozens of people had a professional interest in monitoring his behavior. And he had walked directly to a table where 2 children who looked unmistakably like him were eating noodles with their mother. "Who has the most to gain from this?" he said. Sung-jin opened his hands. "That's the problem. The list isn't short." "Narrow it." "Yeren," Sung-jin said. Possibly. She has the motive, the separation, the circumstances, or someone connected to her family. They're not pleased about the situation. Urine doesn't operate like this. People operate differently when they're losing everything. Taejun thought about Yerin at the kitchen island, hands flat on the marble. The particular contained dignity of a woman confessing something she had held for years. He thought about what she'd said. You made your choice because you were too much of a coward to talk to your wife. That was not the language of someone building leverage. That was the language of someone who had already decided to stop performing. Who else? He said. Sungjin was quiet for a moment. Then, Baek Jun-ho. The name moved through the room like a change in air pressure. Baek Jun-ho was 61 years old. He ran a competing organization, smaller than Taejun's, but older, with roots that went deeper into certain institutional arrangements that Taejun's more recently consolidated operation had been gradually displacing. For 4 years, the relationship between them had been managed through a system of careful protocol, mutual boundaries, understood hierarchies, the specific peace that exists between parties who both know what breaking it would cost. For 4 years, Baek had maintained the surface of that protocol, with the patience of someone who was waiting for the right moment rather than seeking one. He was at the Grand Hyatt event last month, Sungjin said. 3 of his people were in the restaurant the night you crossed the floor. Taejun looked up. I confirmed it this morning, Sungjin said. Cross-reference the reservation list. One of his lieutenants had a private dining booking, 2nd floor, but the sightlines from that table... He paused. They could see your section clearly. The shape of it assembled itself in Taejun's mind with the cold efficiency of a man whose profession had always required him to think 3 moves ahead. Baek had been watching. Baek had seen him cross the restaurant. Baek had put together what the photographs confirmed, and Baek had sent those photographs to Sungjin's personal number, not to Taejun directly, which meant the message was not a threat made to the target. It was a demonstration made to a witness, a way of saying, I know, I have documentation, and I am choosing, for now, to let you know that I know. He wants a meeting, Taejun said. Probably. He wants leverage first. He's establishing the leverage before he asks for the meeting. That's how he operates. Taejun stood up. He went to the window. 14 floors below, the Gangnam morning moved in its dense, purposeful way. The traffic, the pedestrians with their umbrellas angled against the rain, the city going about the ordinary business of a Thursday, with no knowledge of what was occurring in this room. He thought about Amani. He thought about her sitting across from him at that kitchen table, hands wrapped around cold coffee, telling him that the moment she sensed strategy, the conversation was over. He thought about what it would mean for her to receive a version of this, for her to discover that her sons had been photographed in London, that their existence was now information in someone else's hands, that the decision she had been moving slowly and carefully toward had been preempted by someone who had no place in it at all. He thought about Micah at the museum, looking up at something with that focused, curious expression. 20 feet from a camera he had no reason to know existed. Something moved through him that was different from the cold calculation he usually brought to situations like this. It had edges that calculation didn't have. It was not useful. But it was real, and it moved through him completely. Find out what Baek wants, he said. And if it's what I think it is, find out first. Sungjin had the information by early afternoon. He delivered it in person in the same conference room, with the folder from the morning still on the table between them. He sat down and looked at Taejun with the expression he reserved for information that was going to require something from the person receiving it. He wants the Mapo development contracts, Sungjin said. The waterfront project. All 3 phases. The Mapo waterfront project was 3 years of work. It was the most significant legitimate infrastructure play Taejun's organization had made. A carefully constructed arrangement with 2 city-connected development groups that represented the clearest path toward the kind of operational legitimacy that would protect the organization's long-term stability. It was not merely money, it was architecture. It was the structure inside which everything else was being slowly rebuilt. Giving it to Baek Jun-ho would not just cost them the contracts. It would signal, to everyone who operated in their world and watched these things with professional attention, that Kang Taejun had been pressured into concession, that he had something to protect, that was more important than position, that he had a vulnerability. In their world, a visible vulnerability was an invitation. He'll use the photographs, Taejun said. He says if the arrangement is reached, everything goes away. No documentation, no distribution, no further surveillance. And if it isn't reached, Sungjin's expression didn't change. He didn't specify. He didn't need to. Taejun sat with this. He looked at the folder on the table. He thought about what distribution meant in practical terms. The photographs of his sons in the hands of people who would understand immediately what they represented. The birth records. The documentation of Imani's connection to him. In the wrong hands, that information became a target. In the very wrong hands, it became something worse. He has people in London, Taejun said. It wasn't a question. Based on the photographs, yes. At minimum, one surveillance team. Taejun's jaw tightened. They're still there. I don't know. Find out. He stood. Today, within the hour. He called Imani from his car. She picked up on the fourth ring. The sound of the boys in the background. Malik's voice, elevated, the particular pitch of someone narrating something at length. And then the sound receded as she moved somewhere quieter. Taejun, she said. Neutral, the same even quality she had brought to the kitchen table. Are you at the flat? A pause. Yes. The boys are home from the museum. Why? Did you notice anyone outside today? Anyone who seemed to be paying attention to your movements or the boys' movements? The pause this time was different. He could feel her reading the question, reading the weight behind it. What happened? I need you to answer me first. Nothing unusual. Ji-young took them to the museum, they came back, we had lunch. Taejun, what happened? He pressed his knuckles against his mouth. He looked at the gray London light through the windows of his car. He was still in Seoul, 14 hours away from her and the boys, and that distance felt suddenly like a specific and inexcusable failure. Someone had the boys photographed at the museum this morning. Surveillance, long lens. I received the images this morning and I'm dealing with the source, but I need you to understand that the situation requires... Stop. Her voice had gone very quiet. The kind of quiet that is colder than volume. Imani. Someone photographed my children. Yes, I'm dealing with... You're dealing with it. The flatness in her voice was a specific texture he had not heard before. Not anger, or not only anger, something more precise than that. My sons were surveilled in London because of who you are, and you are dealing with it. I'm going to fix this. You don't get to fix this. Her voice didn't rise. That was the thing. It stayed completely level, and the levelness was more devastating than any volume would have been. You came to my home 3 days ago, and you sat at my table, and you told me you were done with strategy, and done with hiding things, and done with making decisions for other people out of fear, and I... She stopped. He heard her breathing. I was starting to believe you. What I told you was true. What you told me was true, and your world has already reached my children, before you even landed back in Seoul, before I had made a single decision about how to move forward. Your world reached my children in a museum. He had no answer for this. There was no answer that was adequate. He sat in the car and held the phone and let her say it because she was right, and she deserved to say it. And the only thing he could offer her that had any value was to not flinch from what was true. You need to take these boys somewhere, he said. Not the flat. A hotel. A different address. Somewhere that hasn't been connected to your name in the last 48 hours. Don't use your regular car service. Pay cash where you can. I'm going to have someone I trust reach out to you within the hour. His name is Daniel Cho. He'll identify himself. He works independently, and he's the best I know at this specific situation. Let him help you until I've resolved this. Resolved it. The words came out careful. You mean handled the person who did this? Yes. And what does handling mean? It means they will not be a problem. Silence. Imani, I need you to trust me for the next 24 hours. I know I have not given you reason to trust me. I know what I'm asking, but I need you to let me do this. Another silence. Longer. He could feel her in it, the intelligence moving through the situation, weighing it, applying the same precise assessment she applied to everything. 24 hours, she said. Yes. And then I want the full truth. Everything. Whatever this is, whatever world I have apparently allowed back into proximity with my sons, I want to know all of it. You'll have it. Daniel Cho. He'll call within the hour. She hung up. Tae-jun sat for another 30 seconds. Then he called Sung-jin. Tell Beck I'll meet him, he said. The contracts? Tell him I'll meet him. Don't tell him anything else. He ended the call. He leaned back against the seat and looked at the ceiling of the car and breathed through the specific weight of what he was holding. Not just the situation with Beck, not just the immediate logistics of getting Imani and the boys to safety, but the larger shape of it, the thing he could not yet see clearly but could feel the edges of. He had gone to London to begin the process of being honest. He had sat across from Imani and told her things that had cost him something real to say, and she had received them with a careful, earned openness that he understood was the most she could offer and more than he deserved. He had come back to Seoul with something fragile in his hands. Not a promise, not an agreement, just the first real possibility of something honest. And within 12 hours, that fragility had been located and targeted by someone who understood exactly what it was worth to him. Baek Joon-ho was not asking for the contracts because he needed them. He was asking for the contracts because he had found the one thing in Kang Tae-jun's life that Tae-jun would not treat as a negotiation. The meeting was set for the following evening, a private dining room in a restaurant in Jongno, neutral territory, by convention, though Tae-jun was already thinking about the ways in which the convention was being used against him and the ways in which he could use it in return. He spent the afternoon working through it with Sung-jin, mapping the landscape of what Beck had and what Beck wanted and what Tae-jun was and was not willing to give, and underneath all of it, running like a current beneath a river's surface, was the image of Micah in front of the Natural History Museum, looking up at something with those focused, ancient eyes, 20 feet from a camera that had no right to exist in the same world as his children. By the time the meeting arrived, Tae-jun had made a decision, not about the contracts, about something that could not be negotiated, could not be leveraged, could not be made into a line item in someone else's arrangement. He drove to Jongno in the cold evening with the city moving around the car and the rain starting again against the windshield and the particular clarity of a man who has finally identified what he is willing to burn everything else down to protect. And he walked into that private dining room and looked at Baek Joon-ho across a table set with 2 empty glasses and a bottle of something expensive neither of them was going to drink. And what he said in the first 60 seconds of that meeting was not what Baek had prepared for, and it was not what the first thing Tae-jun said was, I know about Busan. Baek Joon-ho had been reaching for the bottle. His hand stopped. The private dining room was small. 4 tables, only one set, the others bare and dark in the corners like witnesses who had agreed to stay quiet. The walls were dark wood, old lacquer, the kind of room that had absorbed decades of conversations that were never meant to be documented. 2 of Bak's men stood at the door. Sung-jin was outside in the corridor, which was the arrangement Baek had specified, and which Tae-jun had agreed to because the specifics of the arrangement were not where the meeting was going to be decided. Baek Joon-ho was a compact man, 61, gray at the temples, with the specific stillness of someone who had learned long ago that movement was information and stillness was power. He had a face that was difficult to read quickly, the features arranged in a way that suggested patience rather than expression. He was wearing a dark suit, no tie, and he looked at Tae-jun across the table with the careful assessment of a man who had prepared for a specific conversation and was recalibrating in real time. Sit down, Baek said. I'll stand. Tae-jun looked at him steadily. Busan, December. 4 years before you and I ever had a conversation. A road accident that was investigated and then quietly closed. The woman in the other vehicle, not Yeren. The family that was paid. Something moved in Baek's face, very small, very fast. Then it was gone. I don't know what you think you're referencing, Baek said. You do. Tae-jun pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. Not because Baek had told him to, but because he had decided to, which was a different thing entirely. And the distinction was one that Baek understood immediately because his eyes registered it. The accident that took Yeren's ability to have children was not an accident. The guardrail had been compromised. The vehicle that forced her off the road was registered to a shell company that traces back, through 4 intermediary entities, to a logistics operation you controlled at the time. Baek said nothing. Yeren's family had money. Old money. the kind that comes with property and connections, and the particular value that wealthy families have to people in our position. Her father had been resisting a partnership arrangement for 2 years. After the accident, he became significantly more cooperative. Taejun held his gaze. I don't think you intended for her to survive. I think the outcome surprised you. And I think you've spent the years since making sure the connection stayed buried. The room was very quiet. One of Baek's men at the door shifted his weight slightly. Taejun did not look at him. You're making a serious accusation, Baek said. His voice had not changed in temperature. It was the voice of a man who had been in difficult rooms before and understood that reacting visibly was always the first mistake. I'm making a statement, Taejun said. There's a difference. An accusation goes somewhere. A statement just exists between two people who understand each other. Baek studied him. Where did you get this? That's not something I'm going to tell you. If you're going to sit across from me and say what you just said, you need to be able to substantiate it. I can substantiate it. Taejun said it simply, without emphasis, the way you say things that are true. I spent the last 18 hours making sure of that before I walked into this room. I have documentation that your legal team would need a year to effectively challenge, and I have it held in 3 separate locations with instructions for distribution that activate if anything happens to me or to anyone connected to me. He paused, including a woman in London and her 2 sons. The second shift in Baek's face was different from the first, less controlled. He looked at Taejun with something that had reassembled itself into a different configuration, not quite surprise because Baek was too old and too careful for clean surprise, but a recalculation happening visibly behind his eyes. You came in here to threaten me, Baek said. I came in here to end this, Taejun said. Those are different things too. The contracts are not going to happen. Taejun leaned forward slightly. Let me explain to you exactly what is going to happen instead. The surveillance on the London address is going to end tonight. Every photograph, every copy of every document you acquired is going to be destroyed, and you're going to have someone I trust verify the destruction. Your people are going to leave that city, and they are not going to return in any capacity related to this situation. And in exchange for that, the documentation I have assembled is going to remain exactly where it is. Not submitted, not distributed, not used. Held, Baek repeated. Until you give me a reason to use it, which I am asking you, clearly and directly, not to do. Baek was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the untouched bottle between them. He looked at his hands on the table. The particular quality of his stillness had changed. It was no longer the stillness of a man maintaining position. It was the stillness of a man running calculations on a problem that had just revealed a dimension he hadn't mapped. You built this in 18 hours, he said. I had pieces already, 18 hours to assemble them correctly. Who helped you? People who are loyal to me. Taejun sat back. Which is something you may want to think about when you consider whether this arrangement is acceptable. Baek looked at him for a long time. Taejun held it. He was aware of his own heartbeat, not racing, just present. A steady measured percussion in his chest that he had learned over years of sitting in rooms like this one to use as a calibration instrument rather than a warning signal. His hands were relaxed on the table. His face was neutral. Everything that was happening inside him, the image of those photographs, Micah's face through a long lens, the cold weight of what it had meant to spend the previous night tearing through years of buried history to find the one piece of information that would shift the geometry of this meeting, none of that was visible. This was what he was built for. He had spent his whole adult life being exactly this, capable, controlled, impossible to move. And he had spent the last 3 weeks discovering that the things worth being this for were not the things he had been protecting. The surveillance ends tonight, Baek said finally. Tonight, Taejun confirmed. The documentation stays held. As long as the situation stays resolved, Baek nodded once. It was the nod of a man making a decision he had not intended to make when he walked into the room and who was professional enough to make it cleanly rather than performing reluctance that served no purpose. We're done here, Taejun said. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He walked to the door and Baek's men stepped aside without being asked because the air in the room had shifted in a direction that made the question of physical obstruction feel irrelevant. In the corridor, Sung-jin fell into step beside him without a word. They were in the elevator before Sung-jin spoke. "How much of it was real?" he said. "The documentation." "Enough of it," Taejun said. Sung-jin looked at him. "The Busan connection is real," Taejun said. "The documentation of the Shell Company trail is real. The 3 location holds are real." He paused. "The part about being able to substantiate it within a year of legal challenge, that was optimistic." Sung-jin was quiet for a moment. "If he calls it, he won't." The elevator opened and they moved through the building's lobby, the late-night security desk, the glass doors, and out into the Yongno cold. He's been in this long enough to know the difference between someone who walked in there to win a negotiation and someone who walked in there because they had no other option. He knows which one I was tonight. "Which one were you?" Taejun looked at the street. The rain had stopped. The pavement was wet and reflective. The streetlights doubled in the surface, the city going on in every direction with its ordinary nighttime momentum. "Both," he said. He called Imani from the car. It was nearly 11. She picked up immediately, which told him she had not been sleeping. "It's over," he said. A silence. Define over. "The surveillance is being pulled tonight. The photographs and documentation will be destroyed and I'll have confirmation by morning. You and the boys can go back to the flat." He paused. "Or you can stay where you are for another night if it feels better. Either way, the situation is resolved." Another silence. Longer. "Are you all right?" she said. The question was not what he expected. He sat with it for a moment. The car moved through the city, Sung-jin's profile in the front seat, the lights of Gangnam arriving and passing. "Yes," he said. "What did you have to give up?" He looked at the city. "Nothing I wasn't willing to give." "That's not an answer." "The Mapo contracts," he said. "He wanted them. He's not getting them. I found something he wanted to keep buried more than he wanted what he was asking for, and I used it." He stopped. "That's as much as I'm going to tell you tonight. Tomorrow, when I said you'd have the full truth, I meant it, but not at 11 at night on a phone. You said 24 hours. I know. I'll be on the first flight." Silence again, different texture this time. "The boys are asleep," she said. "Malik cried for about 20 minutes because he didn't understand why we had to leave the flat. I told him it was an adventure. He was not convinced, but he accepted it." A breath. "Micah didn't ask questions. He just packed his bag and watched me the whole time with that face." "That face," Taejun said. "You'll know the one. He's been looking at things that way since he was about 4 months old." A pause. "It's your face, actually, when you're reading a situation." He felt something move through him that was sharp and warm simultaneously. He pressed his hand flat against his knee. "I'll be there tomorrow," he said. "Okay," she said. She didn't hang up immediately. He didn't either. They stayed on the line for a moment in the particular silence of 2 people who have more to say than the current moment can hold. And then she said goodnight, and the call ended. The flight landed at Heathrow at 7:40 a.m. Taejun had not slept. He had spent the red-eye working through the secondary logistics, confirming with Sung-jin that Bayek's people had vacated the London surveillance positions, receiving the first verification of document destruction, running through the downstream consequences of the previous night's meeting, and the adjustments that would be required to the organization's positioning in the coming months. He did all of this with the focused efficiency of someone who has learned to separate the work from the feeling, to run both parallel tracks simultaneously without letting either contaminate the other. But at some point over the North Sea, the work had finished and there was nothing left to run, and he had sat in his seat with the cabin dark around him and the ocean invisible below, and thought about what he was flying toward. Not the situation, not the logistics, the actual thing, Imani and his sons, and the specific shape of what came next. He had resolved the threat. He had done it the way he knew how to do things, with information assembled under pressure, with a calculation made quickly and accurately enough to hold, with the particular skill set of a man whose entire professional life had been built on the ability to find the point where someone else's position was weakest and apply pressure there precisely. He was not proud of this. He was not ashamed of it either. It was what he was capable of, and he had used it to protect his children, and that fact existed cleanly in him without requiring justification. But he was also aware, sitting at 38,000 feet with the work finished and the silence settling, that what was waiting in London was not resolvable by any of those skills. What was waiting in London required something he had spent his entire adult life avoiding. Imani met him at the door of the hotel room. Not the flat. She had decided to stay one more night. The boys were settled, and she saw no reason to move them twice in 48 hours. She was in dark jeans and a gray sweater, her hair pulled back, no jewelry. She looked like someone who had been awake for portions of the night, but had made peace with it. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "The boys are watching something," she said. "You have about 40 minutes before Micah decides he's finished with the television and starts requiring interaction." He came in. The room was a suite, 2 bedrooms, a sitting area with the curtains open on a gray London morning, the city flat and still under low cloud. He could hear the television from the room beyond. Some animated thing, a voice doing sound effects. He heard Malik laugh. He stood in the sitting room and heard his son laugh and felt it move through him like something physical, a concussive thing, warmth and loss simultaneously. The specific grief of all the mornings he had not been present for arriving at once and then settling into something more bearable. Imani sat on the couch. She didn't invite him to sit. He sat anyway, not across from her, but at a right angle. The chair beside the window, the gray light behind him. "Tell me," she said. He told her. Not everything. There were operational details that belonged to a world she had specifically asked not to be managed by, and he respected that line. But the shape of it, the photographs, Bayek, the Busan information, the meeting. He told her clearly, and without the strategic omissions he might have used if she were someone he was managing rather than someone he owed honesty to. She listened the way she always listened, completely, without interrupting, with the full attention that felt like being taken seriously rather than just being heard. When he finished, she sat with it for a moment. "Someone hurt her intentionally," she said. "Yaren." "Yes." "And you used that?" "Yes." "To protect the boys?" "Yes." She looked at the window, the gray morning, the London buildings opposite, their wet facades. "How do you feel about that?" It was not the question he expected. He had prepared for the practical questions, what it meant going forward, what exposure remained, what he was going to do about Bake long term. He had not prepared for that question. "I feel like I would do it again," he said. "And I feel like that's something I need to be honest with you about, that the world I come from does not leave me when I decide I want something different. It's still there. I still know how to use it." He held her gaze. "I used it last night for the first real reason I've had in years. And I don't know how to tell you that the version of me who did that last night is the same person who sat at your kitchen table and told you he was done with strategy." "Maybe they're not incompatible," she said quietly. "I've spent 3 years thinking they have to be. Maybe that's the wrong question." She turned back from the window. "The question isn't whether you can stop being what you are. The question is whether what you are can be directed towards something that deserves it." He looked at her. She looked back at him, level, clear. And then, from the other room, the television went quiet. The door opened. Micah came out first. He was wearing a blue sweatshirt and his socks didn't match. And he was carrying the same focused expression he had been wearing the night in the restaurant, the one that Imani said was Taejun's face when he was reading a situation. He stopped in the doorway and looked at Taejun. Malik appeared behind him, louder, immediate, already saying something about breakfast. Micah did not say anything about breakfast. Micah looked at Taejun for a long moment with those precise, patient eyes. Then he walked across the room, climbed up onto the couch beside his mother, looked at Taejun one more time, and said, "You came back." Taejun's throat tightened. "I came back," he said. Micah studied him. "Mama said you might." "Did she?" "She said she didn't know for sure." He tilted his head slightly. "But she said you might." Malik had arrived at Taejun's chair by this point and was examining him with the open assessment of someone conducting a rapid intake evaluation. "Are you staying for breakfast?" he asked directly. Taejun looked at Imani. She held his gaze. Something in her face, not a smile, not yet, but the precursor to one, the specific quality of expression that exists in the moment before something resolves. That depends, Taejun said, on whether I'm invited. Malik looked at his mother. She gave the smallest nod. He turned back to Taejun with the decisive air of someone who has consulted the appropriate authority and received clearance. You're invited, Malik said. But Micah gets to pick where we sit. That's fair, Taejun said. Micah, who had been watching all of this with his characteristic careful attention, slid off the couch. He went to the small table by the window, 4 chairs, the gray London morning behind it, and pulled out a chair and looked at Taejun. Here, he said. You sit here. He had placed Taejun at the table between himself and his mother, with Malik across. Taejun stood up from the chair by the window. He walked to the table. He sat where Micah had decided he should sit, between his son and the woman who had raised his children alone for 3 years and built something extraordinary, and still, somehow, had found the capacity to sit across from him in a hotel room in London and ask him not whether he could change, but whether what he was could be turned towards something that deserved it. He sat at that table and Malik immediately began explaining at volume what he intended to order, and Micah arranged his silverware with precise attention, and Amani reached for the room service menu across the table, and Taejun felt the full weight of everything that had led to this moment. The divorce, the lies, the photographs on Sungjin's phone, the Jongno dining room, the 18 hours of assembled pressure, the red-eye across 8 time zones, all of it converging here, to a gray London morning and a breakfast table and 2 small boys who had not yet decided what he was to them, but had, provisionally, decided to let him sit down. He understood, for the first time with full clarity, that the most dangerous thing he had ever done in his professional life, the meetings, the leverage, the accumulated risk of 20 years in a world that did not accommodate weakness, none of it had required the particular courage that was being asked of him right now. He picked up the menu. Malik leaned over and pointed at something and said that one was good. He had it yesterday, and Taejun looked at his son's hand on the laminated page. Small, certain, already so much of a person. And he looked at his son's hand on the laminated page, and he made a decision that had nothing to do with strategy. He memorized it. The shape of it, small knuckles, the slight crescent of a scar on Malik's index finger from something he hadn't been present to witness, the way the fingers spread with natural confidence across whatever surface they touched. He memorized it the way you memorize something you understand you will need to carry for the rest of your life, not as documentation, but as ballast. He looked at his son's hand, and then he looked at the menu, and he said, "What did you order yesterday?" And Malik told him, in significant detail, and Taejun listened to every word. Breakfast arrived. It was ordinary in the way that only the most significant moments ever managed to be. The food came, the boys had opinions about it, Micah ate with the focused precision he apparently brought to most activities. Malik narrated his consumption with a running commentary that covered the quality of the eggs. A story about a boy at his London nursery who had done something incomprehensible with a juice box, and his current position on dinosaurs, which was that the large herbivores were underappreciated. Taejun listened. He did not perform listening. He did not construct the appearance of a man who was engaged with his children's breakfast conversation. He actually listened, which was different, and which required nothing from him except the willingness to stop running calculations and be present in the room where his sons were explaining the world to him. Amani watched him do it, not constantly. She was eating, she was responding to the boys, she was present in the meal in her own right. But he felt her attention move across him at intervals, the way you check on something you are not yet ready to trust, but are considering trusting. He did not try to catch her looking. He did not calibrate his behavior to the awareness of being observed. He just sat at the table that Micah had chosen for him and ate his breakfast and learned, in the specific and irreplaceable way you learn things about people only through time spent with them, that Malik laughed before the punchline of his own jokes, and Micah's way of showing he found something funny was a single, slow blink. After breakfast, Malik asked if Taejun could come to the park. He looked at Imani. She considered it for a moment. Not a long moment, but a real one. A moment in which something was being genuinely weighed rather than performed. Then she said yes. They went to the park. It was a cold morning, the grass still wet from the previous night's rain. The sky the specific pale gray of London in autumn that managed somehow to feel soft rather than bleak. Malik ran immediately toward a structure of climbing bars with the absolute confidence of someone who has assessed the situation and found it acceptable. Micah walked beside Taejun, which was not something Taejun had anticipated, and which he was careful not to make anything of. He matched Micah's pace without comment and let the boy lead. Imani walked a few steps behind. They went around the perimeter of the park once. Malik appeared periodically to report on the climbing situation and then disappeared again. Micah walked and looked at things. A crow on a fence post, the wet leaves pasted to the path, a dog moving through the grass in the distance, with the systematic attention he gave to everything. At some point, Micah said, without preamble, "Why don't you live with us?" Taejun kept walking. He kept his pace even. He felt Imani behind him register the question, a slight change in the quality of the air, the particular stillness of a person who is listening very carefully. "I live in Seoul," he said. "That's far." "It is." Micah was quiet for a few steps. "But you came here." "Yes." "Why?" Taejun looked at the wet path ahead of them. He thought about the 18 hours in the Gangnam office, the Jongno dining room, Bayek's face when the ground shifted beneath his position, the red-eye flight, the hotel room. He thought about all the things that had happened to bring him to this park on this gray London morning, and he considered how much of that to translate into language that a 3-year-old could use. "Because you and your brother matter to me," he said, "and I didn't know that soon enough. So I came here to start knowing it properly." Micah processed this. The crow on the fence post watched them pass. "Okay," Micah said. They walked. After a moment, Micah reached up and took Taejun's hand. He did it without looking up, without comment, without the ceremony that adults would have brought to the gesture. He just put his hand in Taejun's the way a child puts his hand in the hand of someone he has provisionally decided is trustworthy, which is perhaps the most specific form of trust that exists in the world. And Taejun held it carefully and kept walking and did not say anything because there was nothing to say that would be adequate to what had just happened. Behind them, he heard Imani's footsteps slow. He did not turn around. He did not need to. They left London 2 days later. The boys went back to the flat. Life resumed its shape. Ji-young arrived with her organized efficiency, projects moved forward. Malik had strong opinions about the snacks available in the flat versus the snacks available in the hotel and lodged these opinions formally with anyone who would listen. Taejun stayed 2 more days, not in the flat but nearby, and he saw the boys each morning and each evening, and in between he walked the city alone in the gray autumn light and thought. He thought about the organization, about what it required of him, and what it had always required, and whether those requirements were compatible with the thing he was trying to build in parallel. Not a merger, not a reconciliation, not the life he had lost, but a presence. A consistent, reliable, unheroic presence in 2 small lives that had been built without him, and that were doing perfectly well without him, and that would continue to do perfectly well without him, but that he was beginning to believe might, be made slightly more complete by him. He thought about what Imani had said, whether what he was could be directed towards something that deserved it. On the last night, she met him for coffee. Not dinner, coffee, in a place near the flat, small and warm, the windows fogged with the difference between the street temperature and inside. The boys were with Ji-young. Imani arrived 5 minutes after him and sat across from him in her coat and unwound her scarf and looked at him with the specific directness she had brought to every real conversation they had ever had. "I want to tell you something," she said. He waited. "When you left," she said, "I was angry for a long time. Not the loud kind, the kind that lives in your chest and runs alongside everything else you do, that you're aware of every day, and that you manage the way you manage a chronic condition, carefully, consistently, without letting it run the situation." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "I built my practice, and I raised the boys, and I built a life that I am genuinely proud of, and I did it alongside that anger. And after a while, the anger got quieter and then quieter again, and eventually I realized it wasn't anger anymore. It had become something else." "What?" "Evidence," she said. "It became evidence of what I was capable of. The anger turned into the fact of what I had built, and the fact of what I had built stopped requiring the anger to justify it." She looked at him steadily. I'm telling you this because I don't want you to be sitting across from me thinking that I forgave you the moment you told me the truth in my kitchen. I didn't. I'm still in the process of it. Forgiveness at the scale of what happened isn't a single decision. It's a direction. I chose the direction. I'm still walking it. Soati Ishamasan. He looked at her. I'm not asking you to be grateful for that, she said. I'm telling you because you deserve to know where I actually am, and because the only way any of this works, the boys, whatever this is between us, all of it, is if we are honest about where we actually are. No performance, no strategy. She paused. No editing for comfort. No editing for comfort, he said. Where are you? She said. Actually, he thought about it. I'm ashamed, he said. Not in a way that's useful. I'm past the part where shame is information I need. I've extracted everything from it I'm going to extract. But it's still there. I look at those boys, and I know what the first 3 years of their lives were, and I know why those years happened the way they did, and the fact that they are extraordinary. That you built something extraordinary that doesn't balance against what was lost. It just means what was lost happened alongside something worth protecting. He paused. I want to be worth knowing to them. Not because it will make me feel better about the past. Because they deserve a father who shows up, and the past is the past, and the only thing I have any ability to affect is what I do from here. She looked at him for a long moment. That's the most honest thing you've said to me in the entire time I've known you, she said. I've had a lot of time to get here. Yes, she said. You have. They drank their coffee. The place was warm around them, the street outside gray and quiet, the evening settling over London with its characteristic gentle weight. I'm not coming back to you, she said. Not cruelly, clearly, the way she said everything that mattered. I need you to understand that. Whatever this is going to be, it's not going to be that. It can't be. Too much happened. The person I was when we were married is not who I am now, and the life I have built does not have a space in it shaped like what we were. I know, he said. Do you? Yes. He held her gaze. I'm not asking for that. I'm not here because I want to recover what we lost. I'm here because I met my sons, and I understood that the only thing that matters now is that they have two parents who are honest with each other and consistent with them. He paused. You and I being what we were, but that would complicate that. I don't want to complicate that. She studied him, then she nodded, once, slowly. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. And somehow, in the specific way of things that have been properly said, it was. So, the arrangement built itself over the following months in the practical, unglamorous way that real things get built. Not in a single decision, but in accumulated small ones. Taejun flew to London once a month. He took the boys to parks, to museums, to the Natural History Museum where Micah could spend 45 minutes examining a single fossil while Malik ran commentary on every exhibit they passed and demanded confirmation that the large herbivores were indeed underappreciated. He came to birthday parties. He came to Ordinary Tuesdays. He showed up when he said he would show up. The boys learned his rhythms the way children learn the rhythms of people who are reliable, gradually, without ceremony, through the accumulation of evidence that he was going to be there. Malik started calling him Appa at some point, casually, as if the word had been there for a while and had simply been waiting for the right moment to come out. Micah used it for the first time 3 weeks later, in the middle of a conversation about something else entirely, without apparent consciousness of the significance of the word. Taejun did not react to either of them. He received both words with the same quiet attention he was trying to bring to everything, not with the dramatic gratitude of a man who understood what he had been given, not with the performance of emotion that would have made the moment about him. He received them the way children needed them received, matter-of-factly, as if the word had always been available and they had simply chosen to use it. Amani watched all of this. She had thought she would need to monitor it constantly. The particular vigilance of a mother who has been the sole protection of her children for 3 years and does not easily redistribute that responsibility. She had expected to be watching for the moment when he failed. The canceled visit, the distraction, the evidence that the version of him that had shown up in London was a version he could only maintain for a limited duration before reverting to something more familiar. She watched for it. It did not come. What came instead was a Sunday afternoon in Seoul. She had brought the boys for the first time 6 months after London for a 2-week visit that she had arranged with the particular care of someone managing logistics of genuine significance. Tae-jun had organized the logistics on his end, a rented apartment in a quiet neighborhood, not his own place, because she had asked for that, and he had not questioned why. Activities calibrated to 2 3-year-olds with strong and often conflicting opinions about how time should be spent. A city that was simultaneously her past and her son's heritage. On the Sunday afternoon, she sat in the apartment Tae-jun had rented and watched through the window as he took the boys to the small park below. He had them both by a hand, Malik pulling forward, as Malik always did, angled toward whatever was next, and Micah walking at his own pace on the other side. Tae-jun walked between them, adjusting his stride to theirs, his head down slightly in the posture of someone listening to 2 conversations simultaneously. He looked like a man who had been doing this for years. He looked like a man who had arrived, after a long and costly journey, at the exact place he was supposed to be. She thought about the conference table, his face across from her, assembled and controlled, the careful language of a man who had already decided and was delivering the decision rather than having the conversation. She thought about Paris, the November morning, the croissant in the cold light, and the grief moving through her like weather. She thought about the hospital room at 11:43 p.m., Malik's furious arrival, Micah 8 minutes later looking around the room as if he had been expecting it. She thought about a restaurant in Seoul, the fork hitting the plate, the look on his face when he saw his sons for the first time. She thought about Micah reaching up and taking his hand in the park without ceremony or comment, the most honest declaration available to a child. I have decided, provisionally, that you are trustworthy. And Tae-jun holding that hand carefully and continuing to walk. She thought about all of it, and she felt the distance between the woman who had sat in that conference room and the woman sitting in this apartment window, and the distance was not only time. It was everything she had built in the time and everything she had survived, and the particular kind of strength that comes not from the absence of damage but from the decision to build anyway, on the damaged ground, with full knowledge of what the ground had been. She was not over it. She suspected she would never be fully over it, in the way you are never fully over things that changed the shape of your life. The past had not been resolved into something comfortable. It had been resolved into something true, and truth was not always comfortable, but it was always more sustainable than the alternative. Her phone was on the table beside her. She picked it up and called her mother. Her mother answered on the second ring with the particular quality of alertness that meant she had been thinking about Imani and had been waiting for the call without wanting to push. "How's Seoul?" her mother asked. Imani looked out the window. Tae-jun had stopped at a bench and was sitting down, and Malik had immediately climbed onto the bench beside him and was telling him something with full-body expressiveness, arms out, the story apparently requiring a wingspan, and Tae-jun was watching with complete attention, and Micah had crouched down to examine something on the ground near the bench and was picking it up carefully to look at it. "It's okay," Imani said. "Just okay?" She watched Malik's story reach its conclusion. The arms went wider, the expression peaked, and Tae-jun laughed. A real laugh, unheld, the specific laugh of someone who has been genuinely caught off guard by something and doesn't have time to manage it. She had not heard him laugh like that in 3 years. She had not, she thought, heard him laugh like that very often, even in the 2 years they were married. "He's different," she said. "Different how?" He's not managing everything anymore. Or he is. He can't help that. It's how he's built. But with the boys, he's..." She paused, trying to find the right word. "He's present, actually present. Like he put something down and he can't pick it back up." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Is that enough?" Imani thought about it honestly. "It has to be," she said. "Not because it's easy, because it's what's real." "Are you okay, baby?" She looked at her sons. Malik had moved on from the bench and was running along the path with the purposeful energy of someone who has identified a destination and is committed to it. Micah was still crouched over his discovery. A leaf, it looked like, something he had found worth examining. Tae-jun was watching both of them. One eye on Malik's trajectory, one turned toward Micah's investigation, the particular divided attention of a parent whose children are in 2 places simultaneously. "Yeah," she said. "I am." She meant it. It surprised her a little the way the truest answers sometimes surprised her. Not because they were unexpected exactly, but because hearing herself say them out loud confirmed something she had been moving toward without being certain she would reach. She was okay. She was better than okay. She was sitting in an apartment in Seoul in the autumn light, watching her sons exist in the presence of their father, and the past was still the past, and the damage was still the damage, but the damage had not won. She had not let it win. She had made too many decisions in the opposite direction, had built too much, had loved her sons too fiercely, had demanded too consistently that the people in her orbit meet her in truth, for the damage to be the final word. That evening, when she brought the boys in from the park, Micah came through the door with his leaf. He had carried it the whole way back, held flat in both palms, still examining it. He brought it directly to Amani and held it up for her inspection. "Look," he said. She looked at the leaf. Yellow-orange, veined with a small imperfection along one edge where something had taken a piece of it at some point. "It's beautiful," she said. Micah looked at it with satisfaction. Then he looked up at Tae-jun, who had come in behind him. "You can keep it," Micah said to his father. Tae-jun looked at the leaf in Micah's outstretched hands. He crouched down to Micah's level, one knee on the floor, bringing himself to the height of his son, the posture of a man who had learned that the most important conversations happened at the correct altitude. He took the leaf. He held it with the same care Micah had used to carry it. "Thank you," he said. Micah studied him for a moment with those ancient, patient eyes. Then he nodded once with the finality of someone who has made a determination and considers the matter settled, and went to find Malik. Tae-jun stayed crouched for a moment with the leaf in his hands. Then he straightened up. He looked at Amani across the hallway. She was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely, watching him the way she had been watching him for months. Not guarded, not warm, not any of the categories that were too simple for what was actually between them. She was watching him the way you watch something that is in the process of proving itself, which requires a particular quality of attention, fully present, fully honest, not yet concluded. He held up the leaf slightly. She looked at it, at him. She almost smiled. The precursor of it, the thing before the thing, something in her face that acknowledged the moment without being performed for it. "Come on," she said. "They need dinner." He put the leaf carefully in his jacket pocket. He followed her into the kitchen. Malik was already at the table, explaining loudly what he wanted and why. Micah was arranging the salt and pepper shakers with geometric precision. The kitchen was warm, and the autumn dark was settling outside the windows over Seoul, and the city went on in all directions beyond the glass with its lights and its traffic and its vast ordinary noise, and inside this kitchen 4 people were making dinner, 2 of them 3 years old and possessed of strong opinions, and 2 of them carrying between them 3 years of wreckage and 5 years of something that had never had quite the right name. And none of it was resolved in the clean way of things that are finished. It was resolved in the real way. The only way things actually are. Still complicated, still carrying the weight of what it had been. Still requiring on both sides a daily decision to keep walking in the chosen direction. But present. Whole in the way that things are whole when they have been honestly broken and honestly rebuilt. Not seamless, not smooth, but structurally sound in a way that seamless things never quite manage to be. Tae-jun stood at the kitchen counter and chopped vegetables the way Amani showed him. She corrected his technique once, without ceremony, and he adjusted without comment. And Malik leaned off his chair to monitor the process and provide direction. And Micah had progressed from the salt and pepper shakers to aligning the placemats with the focused satisfaction of someone whose sense of order had been honored by the universe. And Amani stood at the stove with her back to the room, stirring something, and felt the shape of the evening, its warmth, its noise, its ordinary managed chaos, and recognized it for what it was. Not the life she had planned, not the life she had lost, something she had built herself from the ground up, from Paris November mornings, and London rain, and Dubai heat, and Cape Town light, and 3 years of doing everything alone. And it had become, gradually, without announcement, through the slow accumulation of honest decisions made in the right direction, something that held. She did not turn around. She did not need to see it to know it was real. She could feel it in the room behind her, the warmth of it, the noise of it, the imperfect and irreplaceable fact of it. She kept stirring. Outside, Seoul moved through its evening with the indifference of a great city, and the autumn pressed its cold against the windows. And inside the kitchen the light was warm and the voices were loud, and the leaf sat carefully in a jacket pocket against a man's chest like something he intended to keep. He did.